Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. I hope you all had a very nice, pleasant, crime-free Valentine's Day earlier this week. And if you didn't, I promise that it's not as bad as the case we're about to talk about. On Valentine's Day in 2001, a woman named Susan Hamilton was going about her day. She had a lot of things to do that day, so she was starting bright and early. Susan was married to a man named John, who worked as an obstetrician, and Susan worked with him running his medical clinic. Susan and John had been married for 15 years, and both had grown children from previous marriages. For both of them, this was their second marriage, and they had a great relationship. They were well liked in their community and had a lot of friends who thought very highly of them. To the people around town, Susan was seen as a trophy wife. She was beautiful, smart, and ran in a very prominent social circle. John, being an obstetrician, had several surgeries scheduled for that day, so he had left their home in Oklahoma City pretty early that day. He had planned on stopping home in the middle of the day before he went back to his office to give Susan her Valentine's Day gift. As John pulled into the driveway with his flowers, he noticed something not quite right about the state of the home, and he felt as though something was wrong. As he made his way around the home, he discovered that the back door was wide open. Troubled, he went into the home to investigate. The downstairs of the home seemed to be in order, but when he made his way upstairs, he found Susan unconscious in the master bathroom. John made a frantic 911 call and tried to revive her, but unfortunately, it was too late. Susan was dead. It had appeared that morning when Susan was in the shower, she was surprised by an attacker who strangled and beat her to death. We know that the back door was left open, so we can assume that the killer entered and then exited back through there. This whole thing happened in the middle of the day, and not one neighbor saw anyone suspicious entering or exiting the home. This is something that investigators found super suspicious. Also, the nerve of something like this happening in broad daylight concerned neighbors and police alike. They thought this potential robbery gone wrong could have happened to anyone. Very unnerving. This was a very prominent part of Oklahoma City, and this was definitely not something you would expect to happen in this part of town. The widely believed motive at the time was that a burglar had broken in through the back door, intending on stealing jewelry and other valuables. They may have assumed that no one was home, being it the middle of the day and all, but were surprised by Susan and killed her in a panic before fleeing out through the back door. The other theory was more so related to John. At his practice, he did perform some abortions. This was the same clinic Susan ran for him. The practice had already been a target of anti-abortion protesters, and they knew John and Susan specifically and would often hold demonstrations outside their offices and hold up signs that would say things like, "Wanted for murder, John Hamilton." In that part of the country, this was significantly less accepted than in other parts of the country, and the fact that John and Susan were not really being secretive about what happens at the clinic made investigators believe this was a promising lead. By all accounts, it had appeared that the couple had been specifically targeted. While at the police station, John was breaking down, crying, just engaged in a full-on episode. He was pushing the table around, and banging on things, trying to get the police's attention. During Susan's autopsy, the medical examiner had found no evidence of sexual assault. He had found that she had been strangled with several neckties belonging to John. We can guess that the assailant would have grabbed whatever they could find from the home, as they possibly weren't expecting to encounter anyone there. There were also several marks on her head and face, indicating that her head had been hit into the ground several times at the hand of the assailant. The medical examiner had determined that her death was ultimately caused by repeated blows to the head with a blunt object. There was a very large wound on her forehead that was caused by the blunt object, and the medical examiner believed this was a weapon of opportunity, something they had just grabbed from the home and bludgeoned her with. The police later found out that an anti-abortion group was planning a demonstration right in front of the Hamiltons' home. They wondered if the assailant was among them. 1 month before Susan's murder, the police had found out that a permit to picket had been obtained by this group. Investigators were on their way back to the Hamiltons' home to look for clues and survey the scene for evidence. Surely something had been left behind. While looking around, they found no evidence of a break-in. This would indicate that the back door was left unlocked. Intentionally or not, we don't know. Would someone have known the door wasn't locked? Or did they just get lucky? On the kitchen counter, police found a Valentine's Day card, open, from John to Susan. The card said, "We are important, loving, caring people together. My life would be incomplete without you. I love you, John." There was another card laying close by on the counter, this one from Susan to John, and it had quite the different message inside. Her card said all the usual lovey, pre-written things you would find on a Valentine's Day card, but she had written up in the corner, "Obviously, I bought this before last Monday." Wow, what happened last Monday? On the bottom she wrote, "I bought this card 2 weeks ago, and it doesn't seem as appropriate now." She goes on to say, "I do love you and hope you have a great day. Susan." When trying to determine what happened 2 weeks ago, police brought John back in. During the interrogation, John had said that they had a fight about money, but police thought it was something more than that. They had found out that there had been whispers and accusations that John was having an affair with an exotic dancer who was one of the patients at his clinic. They had had a fight, and once Susan had gotten a hold of the phone records, she found out that John had made several calls to this dancer and confronted him about it. John had called the dancer more than 60 times that month, and Susan was fuming. The day that she had confronted him, she was so furious that she had left and spent the night with a friend. She couldn't even be around him. During the police interrogation, John adamantly denied having an affair with the dancer. But there were just too many calls for this to be anything other than an illicit affair, at least in Susan's eyes. Fed up, Susan forced John to write a letter to the dancer, saying that he would stop seeing her and she would have to find someone else to be her doctor, as she was no longer welcome as a patient at his clinic. He wrote and sent this letter just 1 week before Susan's murder. Timing, am I right? News outlets had their own theories about what had happened. Once a local news station had gotten a hold of the frantic 911 call John had made to paramedics, they felt that it was a little suspicious. As a doctor, He would be used to seeing blood and know to take quick action in an attempt to resuscitate. The call sounded strange, and the way he was acting made people question his behavior. The things that he was saying and the order in which he was saying them made the call sound almost rehearsed, as if he was expecting to make this call and say these exact things. The local news station had begun their own investigation of sorts and went out of their way to send the tape to a company that specialized in computer voice stress analysis. The test charted things like inflections and levels of stress in John's voice. The test indicated no excessive blood flow impacting voice. An expert concluded that John was not stressed to the degree one would be under the circumstances he claimed. He had determined that, more likely than not, John had definitely rehearsed the phone call before it was made. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a yes he did it or no he didn't do it. It was just peculiar that he wasn't being truthful to the degree that he claimed. This led investigators to think maybe there was something more to this. When revisiting the original interrogation tape immediately after the murder, John seemed to not be able to control his emotions. He would cry, wailing, and then suddenly stop. He was getting up and down and moving around a lot and constantly moving the chair around and banging on the table. And anyone watching this tape would think, this guy is acting. Just overall odd behavior. As suspicious as this all seemed, and it was getting more and more suspicious by the minute, John had had an alibi for the time of the murder. He was performing surgery and had many witnesses that could account for his movements and whereabouts for the majority of the day. Based on the blood found at and around the scene, much of it could be explained. It all appeared to be consistent with the time of the attack. John was covered in blood as well, but that was to be expected. When he had come home and discovered Susan, he had gotten her blood on himself while he attempted to resuscitate her. He held her while paramedics arrived, and this was consistent with someone rendering aid to someone, especially being his wife. However, some of the blood on the inner forearm portion of John's shirt could not be explained. Blood analysts found blood spatter on the front button area of his shirt, as well as below the collar and on his sleeve cuffs. These spatters suggest that he would have been in close proximity when Susan received the fatal blows. Cradling her after she was deceased would not have created this blood spatter pattern, so this was definitely calling into question John as a suspect. When examining John's shoes, analysts also found very tiny, almost invisible blood droplets that were suspicious in their shape and angle. There was no possible way that blood droplets of that nature would have found their way onto his shoes in this way. If he had really only lifted her head and held her the way he said he did, no chance evidence like this would have been found. No chance. It was determined that the blood found on his shoes was the result of medium velocity impact spatter, which would have been caused by something like a bludgeoning, which, as you recall, was what Susan had tragically been subjected to. John actually hired a blood spatter expert, and he had agreed with the original assessment that the blood droplets found on his clothes were consistent of being in the presence of someone receiving medium velocity blows. The blood spatter that was found on John's sleeves could only have gotten there by falling directly onto his shirt. This would not be due to a transfer. This was due to direct impact. For the blood to get up into his shirt sleeve on its own, it would have had to have been traveling at a speed consistent with blowback from a striking motion. All things considered, there are very few positions where this could have occurred. Every single little blood spot on John's shirt and shoes were tested, and all came up belonging to Susan. Investigators also found evidence of blood in John's car after spraying with luminol on the steering wheel, the driver's seat, as well as some hair and tissue found on the driver's side floor. When police were speaking with the Hamiltons' housekeeper, she revealed that there was a marble figurine missing from the bathroom. This item would have been consistent with the blunt object indicated by the medical examiner. It was later revealed by pager messages between John and the hospital that John was not at the hospital in between his 2 scheduled surgeries. Remember, he had gone home in the middle of the day to give Susan flowers. When he was out that afternoon, he had gotten several messages from the hospital saying that he needed to get back there right away as his second patient was already under anesthesia. Imagine you were that patient that was just put under and this is happening. John didn't explicitly declare his whereabouts, but blood spatter evidence had shown he was home. John Hamilton was arrested and charged with murder. During the trial, it was revealed that John was regularly making payments to others without Susan's knowledge. One of the recipients was one of John's children from his previous marriage. It wasn't that he was making all these payments to his son, it's that he was lying about it. When Susan had found out that he had lied and kept it from her, she said that if he ever did it again, she would leave him. Susan also believed that there was more going on between John and the dancer than John had admitted. However, when speaking to police, the dancer had told them that she thought John was just working up the nerve to ask her out. There was no relationship there. At least not the one John had hoped for. Earlier Valentine's Day morning, prosecutors believe that Susan and John had gotten into a fight and argued about what Susan had written in her card. John had felt Susan was onto him and felt things were soon to come crashing down. Hospital records show that John had arrived to the hospital that morning and performed his first surgery. He then returned home, possibly hoping to smooth things over with Susan, but none of this was confirmed. Whatever John hoped would happen turned into another argument, so while Susan was still in the bathroom, having just got out of the shower, he went to his closet and retrieved several ties and attacked Susan, strangling her until she was unconscious. Once on the floor, John repeatedly hit Susan's head on the tile, then delivered the lethal blow with the marble figurine. It was this blow that caused him to get the blood droplets on his sleeves and shoes. He was about to clean up the scene, but then he got that page from the hospital telling him he needed to hurry back to do his second surgery. Since the patient was already under anesthesia, he knew he couldn't clean up now. He had to come up with another plan. He took his bloody pants and the marble figurine to his car, which is how Susan's blood had gotten into his car, and he intentionally left the back door open. The bloody pants and figurine were never recovered. Once at the hospital, John went about as if nothing was wrong. He changed into his scrubs and prepared for surgery. If you're wondering how he was able to perform surgery after just committing this heinous crime, he was doing a surgery he had done hundreds of times before and was just on autopilot. When he returned home, he scrapped the cleanup and went into acting mode, where he made his frantic 911 call, which wasn't fooling anybody. He thought that by doing CPR on Susan, he would give paramedics and investigators an excuse as to why Susan's blood was all over him. Only it could have only gotten there from him delivering the lethal blows. Also, one layer would have been significantly older than the fresh layer, so I don't know how he was expecting to explain that. John Hamilton was found guilty of murdering his wife Susan and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I do want to note that while in custody, John had asked the police if they could leave the door open because he felt like he was in a cage. How's that jail cell feel? John Hamilton currently remains incarcerated at the Dick Corner Correctional Center in Hominy, Oklahoma. Totally tragic and unnecessary loss of life. Let me know what you think about this case and how it was handled. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Ding boys.
Have lost internet connection.